Boca Tov and good morning. I am Rabbi Stephen Moskowitz of Congregation Lador Vador here on Long Island, and this is Monday Musings, my 15-minute spiritual kickstart to the week. At least that's what I hope this will be. I am joined by my good friend and colleague, Rabbi Jessica Spitalnic, mates of Temple Beth El of Boca Raton, Florida. And she's asked me to say that she is a graduate of the University of Wisconsin and is a proud Badger. So I guess, sorry to my daughter who went to the University of Michigan. But anyway, all right. And Jessica and I have been friends for some 13 years. We met in the Shalom Hartman Institute Rabbinic Leadership Initiative in Jerusalem. That wonderful cohort that has offered us a great many friends. It's interesting how something in our 40s can be so formative. Something that I experienced, when you think you're all set, and then we met in Jerusalem that year, and that's become such a formative time and such important friendships and relationships that we all gained there. So Jessica, I'm really excited to have you on the show, as I like to call it. And I thought you and I have spoken, and you shared with me some of an inspirational service that you're doing that's part of your high holiday prayers and an Askara memorial service that you've been doing, and it's very important for you.
Yeah,
so you can talk about it.
Sure. You very modestly didn't want me to talk about it, but I think it's a significant part of why you're not just a friend, but a colleague that I admire. When we were in Israel, you had started on Yom Kippur afternoon this service in memory of Daniel Pearl, and it was this very creative layout of music and reflection and remembrance and message that reflects this traditional part of the Yom Kippur afternoon liturgy. And I stole it with permission, and it influenced our Yom Kippur afternoon since then. We take an anniversary. We never did one solely on Daniel Pearl like you did, but like if it's an anniversary of World War II or the Yom Kippur War, or the 67 War, we will look at text and read music. We're doing it again this year in light of all that's going on in the world. And I am appreciative of the opportunity, because the year that we marked an anniversary, I think, of the beginning of or the end of World War II. There was some anniversary in recent years, and with two congregants who had been in the military in World War II, and they've both since passed away. And so I'm so grateful for this. And so I took them to Dunkin' Donuts, and I had the two of them there talk about their military experience, and one was in the Army and one was in the Air Force or whatever it was called at the time. And he had been a bomber, like throwing bombs down, and been injured and won an award in bravery. And the other man, it was Stan and George, and George had been on the ground, and they got in a little bit of a fight because I guess the guys in the planes were treated much better than the guys on the ground. And he's like, you don't know, I slept in the mud and you had bunks and things. It was hysterical. But I treasure that, only because inspired by you, we started this themed afternoon, and I would have never had that conversation with those two World War II vets. It was precious, and it influenced our worship that afternoon, and such pride for them to sit, because they were still able to come at the time, to sit in the sanctuary and have them hear their words and the impact they made. Stan always wore his leather jacket, the bombardier jacket.
Right.
They always fit him. Whenever we would have him speak, he would wear it. And so I thank you for that. And I agree that Hartman time, I think you can always learn. But that Hartman time, so many significant things happened in my life. I started a huge law program. My marriage ended. There was just a lot of personal and professional, and it was to have this very tight group. It's rabbinic indulgence in a way, that we got to study, and we were, given a stipend to be there to live in Israel in the summer. My kids grew up in the summer in Israel, and in Israeli camp traumatized them. They tell me often, but otherwise it was really precious. And just to be able to relax and learn, you can see how it made you a better rabbi and person and partner and parent, I think, for sure. I treasure.
Yeah, if we can go back a little bit, because I mean, I'm fascinated about, where you've taken that service idea. So, for me, it came out of reading the Yom Kippur liturgy and the Askara service, and talking about, Rabbi Akiva's martyrdom 2,000 years ago, and looking out at my congregation and realizing that this was not, it was not resonating with people. And so I wanted to figure out a way to help, lift the liturgy and lift the prayers so that it could resonate, what the intention of that prayer was. And we unfortunately have had, such modern examples of martyrdom and sacrifice. And you took it to a whole different level in terms of, honoring vets, and speaking about their war experiences. And has it had a similar effect, do you think, in terms of congregants resonating with it?
I think, like you said, it's more accessible, and it's hard. That liturgy of Yom Kippur afternoon is hard, and you're tired, and you're hungry, and I think, yeah, I mean, we're 5 miles from Parkland, and last year, we included Parkland in that at that part, and the song that the kids wrote after the shooting, and the Pittsburgh shooting, I think we included part of as well. And so it becomes a place to reflect on like the things people are thinking about. And, I always think the role of this, I love this phrase, I don't know where it came from, but our role is to comfort the uncomfortable and discomfort the comfortable. And I think that service serves that role in a lot of ways, where like you're reminded, oh, that did happen. And, oh, like this is Jewish history. And, as easy as my life is being a Jew, it's not always that way. And let's remember, but at the same time, like there's a resonance that people are remembered. And that they're cared about. It'll be really interesting because, as we talked about, like the high holiday services will be online for a lot of us this afternoon. I'm curious how many more people, will see that and reflect and how they'll connect with it. But I think you're right. It's more relevant, but I don't want to lose Rabbi Akiva either. We still start with him. And the stories from a long time ago, we're looking at like Donna Grassi Nasi, who was a woman during the Spanish Inquisition, and keep those historical moments. And I was a tour guide in Israel for the Reform Movement for NIFTY in my years in rabbinical school. And so history is always informed. I was like learning to be a rabbi in rabbinical school as I was learning to be a tour guide and guide Israel. And so, history for me is like a huge place to talk about in sermons and services and, in teaching. It's just very significant.
Yeah, for me, Rabbi Akiva became almost like a jumping off point. We no longer dwelled on him and his story. And I'm not trying to suggest that Rabbi Akiva, of course, is insignificant in any way. But I don't think he has the same power and resonance to our congregations as he might to the two of us. We've read him and studied his words and are familiar with his story at a different level. And I think people are connect much more to contemporary examples or recent historical examples, as you have with World War II. What were you were mentioning something? What's that?
He did learn in his 40s, though.
He did. That's right. That's a good connection. Very nice. And so we have that Hartman connection. So what were you mentioning about the lawyers program? Say more about that.
When it was, I guess, 12 years ago now. And again, like, it's not that like Hartman said, go do amazing programs or go think differently. It's just to be able to learn in that context with these amazing teachers just makes you dream bigger. That's what I found Hartman did for me. So yes. What happened is, and I love history. And so what happened is like 12 years ago, we have a congregant who's a child survivor of the Holocaust, and she invited me to a child survivor Yom HaShoah Holocaust Memorial Program. And child survivors band together because they lost their childhood, and they have that bond. If someone went through their 20s or 30s, not that it was any easier, but they had a childhood most likely. Those who went through the Holocaust as 5, 6, 7, 8-year-olds never knew from a childhood. And she had invited me, and offhandedly someone mentioned that a local university, Lynn University, had these documents from the Nuremberg trials. And I had already started to try to do doctor's programming for physicians, because Joe Jew is not always coming to temple for learning. He or she is coming for his daughter's bat mitzvah, God forbid, his grandmother's funeral, but not for his own or her own stuff. And so I was trying to figure out, how can I get to business people? We just brought in Startup Nation authors, Dan Senior and Saul Singer. And I heard this, I was like, I'll do something with lawyers. And I got in touch with Lynn University at Congregant as a fundraiser for them. The librarian said, we're digitizing the library. We were going to get rid of those books, and don't get rid of them. And it turns out we did some provenance on them, brought in John Barrett, who's an amazing law professor at St. John's right near you. And they belong to Robert Jackson, who was the Supreme Court justice, who was the head of the trials. 2 years in, we had amazing members who had built a replica of the Nuremberg courthouse in the Virginia Holocaust Museum. They helped the program grow. They're amazing, amazing couple, the Weinbergs. And Florida is not like New York. So in Florida, I am a CLE body. I know. My organization, we are able to give continuing ed credits for lawyers. A lot of the lawyers have the bar in New York and Florida, and they're like, Jessica, can you try for the New York bar? And it was literally like a 25-page document. I filled it out, and New York's like, no, you can't give CLEs. So every year we get between 300 and 400 attorneys at this lawyer's lunch. Then they come for the CLEs, but we've had Senator Chris Dodd, whose father was at the trials as a lawyer, crying, talking about just how we enabled him to spend the afternoon with his father. And for 10 years, and I finally got him last year. Thank God I got him last year. Ben Ferens, who's pretty famous. There's a documentary about him. If you Google his name, he's the last living prosecutor from Nuremberg. He's 100 years old. He lives nearby in Delray. Wow. I tried for 10 years, but he wouldn't. 60 Minutes has talked about him, and we finally got him. Thank God, because it never would have been today able to have him.
Can we maybe talk about, what do you feel is the purpose of, both of us have this creative impulse to kind of reach beyond the regular service, to add some meaning, to find some different programs that are going to pull a different group of people into the synagogue. What is the grand purpose of doing these things? Not just to fill the sanctuary.
No. So for the lawyer's lunch, it is literally for me to have attorneys see that law was the only thing that brought order to a post-Holocaust, post-World War II Europe, and let them take 2 hours of their billable time, whatever they're dealing with, mortgages or divorces or bankruptcies or real estate or whatever, stop and see that law, their profession, what they do is the only thing that could put order on the chaos and the horror of Europe after World War II. And it's we get Jews and non-Jews at the luncheon, and it's an incredible reminder of the power of history. And, I think people sometimes think, what they do is mundane or they can't make a difference. And they absolutely can make a difference. And it shows people that.
I want to see if I understand this. So you see the purpose as the synagogue sort of affirming the grander meaning of their profession and the power of what they are doing in terms of the law.
Yeah, I mean, I do have that creative impulse that you have as well. And I think in general, and specifically with the lawyers, it's to say there are aspects of your life, there are things that I think are easy entree for people. And I think sometimes people walk in synagogue and they're made to feel dumb because they don't know the Hebrew or they have bad memories of a rabbi growing up or whatever. And we do that and they don't feel knowledgeable. And what I try and do is say, no, look, in your life, this is something that you love or is relevant to you or you care about or is your profession. And I want to show you how it relates to what we're doing at synagogue, and it relates to Judaism and how, you can view it with a Jewish lens and understand it differently. Because I think people compartmentalize, and they put, this here and that there. And I think there's a way, to say, I think there's nobility in like being knowledgeable and connected to your Jewish community and also having a life in the world at large. And I think that's what I try and do with that luncheon in particular, but with everything. Like, why would I care about this? And I think that's part of the reason. I don't know what you're talking about, the high holidays, but one of the struggles I think of, rabbis are having putting sermons together, we see in our Facebook groups, is like, how do you talk about, like, how do you be relevant when we're all going through such pain and difficulty? Like, how do we show people, how temple and Judaism helps? And, I'm finding a lot of people are tuning in on Friday night for services that haven't before. They're finding time for it, and it's giving them comfort in these times, but it's hard.
I want to reaffirm, part of what you just said, and that impulse that you were talking about, which is that, people tend to think of Judaism as what happens in the sanctuary, like that's it. So, and being, Jewishly literate means to be able to recite the Aliyah blessing, or knowing how to do Hagban Galila, lifting and dressing the Torah. And part of what you're saying, which I just think is just wonderful, is that, that we're doing these other grander things and big things in our lives, whether it's whether it was, serving our country as the World War II veterans, or whether it was, the day in and day out of lawyering. That, law is something that has, a Jewish ethic behind it. And I've often said, that if your Judaism stops when you leave the synagogue, then it's kind of pointless.
Mm-hmm.
That's it. It's really not doing what it's supposed to be doing. It's supposed to travel with you, to the supermarket when you do everything, when you go for a walk. And I don't want it to be compartmentalized. Part of what we're discovering is that we have far greater participation now. It's much easier to participate. And I think I've always said, and I think we've always believed, that Judaism should follow us out of the synagogue, and we as rabbis should be leaving the synagogue to teach, in a sense. And now we can. I mean,
Mm-hmm.
it's just, all you have to do is turn on your computer and put it on in the kitchen, or put your phone on in the kitchen, and there's your Jewish your Jewish teaching. You wanted to say something in response.
So I agree with what you said, that Judaism should be beyond the synagogue, but you and I as rabbis and have a vested interest in that happening. And I think
in the synagogue?
In the synagogue and in like, we chose careers where we see Judaism everywhere, and it's important and it's relevant, but a lot of people in our world may not. And so our job is not just to have it go beyond the synagogue, but like to, I think, connect with people directly and show them that it's so relevant to their lives. Like, I'll give you a perfect example. Right now we're doing this program with our Havaraz where they're watching this movie Golda, a documentary about Golda Meir that came out last year. And then we're having discussions. And last night I found out that one of our converts is involved in a movie that's coming out about Menachem Begin. I would have never known that if not for this. And so, like, he now has something that I want to bring to the synagogue that was something that's a passion of his. It turns out the filmmaker is someone we brought years ago, so it's even more resonant. So I think that they're like I think if, like, rabbis live in their ivory tower and, stay in synagogue and think like, it's 2 ears and one mouth, we've got to listen to people. And I think I have an ability to hear and see in people and draw lines of connection, like dots, like connection, like, oh, if that's interesting to people, or if that person does that, maybe we could bring that in here. And I think that's what happened with Nuremberg. Like, they're just some dusty books in a library, but lawyers weren't learning about Nuremberg in law school. And here were we do it with Lynn University, these 20-year-old kids who knew more about this trial than these lawyers who'd been lawyers for decades. And so I think that, just seeing that gem inside of people and figuring out a way to bring it back to the synagogue so there's like more easy flow. And yes, these times are crazy where like it's everywhere. I'm having tomorrow, Tony Bayfield, who's a rabbi in England, he's the reason I'm a rabbi. I've asked him for years to come to the States. He won't come. I'm interviewing tomorrow at Lunch and Learn because we can do it now.
Now we can do it. I want to just offer a closing word. It's a beautiful image. I'm not sure if you realize that's part of what you were drawing out, but you were saying almost that the rabbi's job is to, draw that Jewish thread, through people's lives, and that Jewish connection that they may not even realize that their profession is Jewish in a sense. And so, and I think our job more than anything else, and part of what we can do even better now, is leave the synagogue. That we should be taking the synagogue out of its walls. And that's really where Judaism should be lived, and that's where Judaism is best felt. As much as the rituals that we're all heavily preparing for are important, that Judaism is best felt outside of the walls of the synagogue. So thank you, Jessica, for joining me. I am so grateful for our friendship and for learning from you. So Boker Tov.
Boker Or.